The steam rose in thick clouds around Ethan's reddened hands, the blistering water gnawing at his skin like punishment he willingly accepted. He scrubbed another greasy plate, his fingers trembling but never pausing. Just 3 months ago, he'd been perched above the city skyline in a polished glass tower, sealing multi-million-dollar deals with a confident smile. Now, he was buried in the back of his own crumbling empire, drenched in sweat and dishwater. Carrington's Bistro, once the jewel of his restaurant chain, had fallen from grace. Ethan now went by Rick. No one here knew who he really was. To them, he was just another desperate man looking for a paycheck. "Rick, move your ass. We got another round coming in." Tony's voice sliced through the air like a whip as he dumped a tray of sticky glasses onto the already overcrowded sink. Ethan didn't protest. He just nodded and continued scrubbing, silent and unseen. The irony of it all clung to him more stubbornly than the grease. He had created Carrington's from scratch, starting with a single food truck and building it into a national brand with 37 locations. But something had gone rotten in this one. This location was bleeding money and drowning in one-star reviews. Despite hiring multiple consultants to diagnose the issue, nothing changed. The numbers dropped, the complaints rose. He'd heard enough. Rude staff, cold food, filthy tables. It didn't make sense, so Ethan made a decision that rattled his entire board. He would go undercover. It was a bold move, unorthodox, risky. But the brand he'd built was more than a business. It was his legacy. The transformation was meticulous. New name, Rick Martinez. Age 42. Background, recently divorced, seeking work after being laid off from a warehouse job. He added a beard, changed his posture, wore thick glasses. His soft hands, once used to boardroom handshakes and expensive watches, were now raw and cracked from hours of scrubbing and sanitizing. His back screamed at him during 10-hour shifts, but he endured, not just for answers, but for redemption. And soon, the cracks in the system began to reveal themselves. Kyle, the night manager, was a lazy tyrant who preferred scrolling TikTok to actually managing the floor. Marcus, the chef, tossed perfectly edible meals into the trash after 5 minutes under the heat lamps, claiming it was company policy, one Ethan had never written. The servers dragged their feet, indifferent. And the hostess, she treated diners like they were a nuisance to her existence. But one employee stood out. Harper Collins, a quiet enigma. She usually worked the back section where customers were sparse and complaints abundant. Late 20s, maybe. Dark hair always pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, second-hand clothes pressed with a kind of quiet dignity. She didn't gossip, didn't loiter, didn't scroll on her phone. She moved like a shadow, fast, efficient, alert. But what truly caught Ethan's attention was not her speed, it was her intensity. She missed nothing. When a customer winced at a wrong order, she was already correcting it. When Marcus tried to send out something questionable, she intercepted it. And yet, for all her sharpness, there was something deeply guarded in her, a tension that lived just beneath her skin. Ethan noticed she never left right after her shift. She lingered, always finding something else to clean, menus to straighten, chairs to push in. It was as if she was avoiding something, or someone. "That girl's weird," Stephanie muttered one night during a smoke break. Ethan, drying his hands, listened from behind the kitchen door. "Always hanging around after her shift like she's got nowhere to go." "Maybe she doesn't," Jake, the bartender, replied thoughtfully. "Ever notice how she never talks about going home? No friends, no plans, just disappears after she leaves." But what truly raised Ethan's alarms was how Harper behaved around Kyle. Every time the night manager entered, her whole body tensed, her shoulders stiffened. She busied herself with anything that let her turn her back to him. During meetings, she sat in the farthest corner and spoke only when directly addressed. and Ethan often caught her watching Kyle, not with fear exactly, but with an exhausted sort of vigilance, like someone who's seen enough and expects worse. The moment that changed everything happened during Ethan's third week. A young family was seated in Harper's section. Their little boy, about 8, bubbled with excitement while ordering his food. His mother mentioned his severe peanut allergy in a hushed, careful tone. Ethan watched Harper nod attentively, jot something down, then march purposefully toward the kitchen. 20 minutes later, the food arrived. Harper walked out with the plate, her expression composed, but then something in her gaze changed. A flicker of doubt, a sudden freeze. Without hesitating, she yanked the plate back, just inches from the boy. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "There's been a mistake. Let me fix this right away." She disappeared into the kitchen, urgency radiating from her every step. Ethan dropped the plate he'd been scrubbing and leaned in, watching as she confronted Marcus. Her tone was low but sharp, urgent and unwavering. And that was when Ethan knew Harper wasn't just a good server. She was the key to understanding what was broken here. Because while everyone else let this place decay, Harper was trying to save something, or protect someone, and Ethan needed to find out what it was. Before it was too late. This chicken was cooked in the same oil as the beer-battered shrimp, Harper said, her voice laced with urgency and a kind of sharp clarity that made both Marcus and Ethan freeze. "The child has a severe peanut allergy. The shrimp batter contains peanut flour." Marcus didn't even blink. He gave a lazy shrug, casually wiping his hands on his grease-smeared apron. "So, it's cooked. High heat kills everything." "That's not how allergies work," Harper snapped, her tone edging toward panic. Her voice rose, not in volume, but in intensity. "Even trace amounts can trigger anaphylaxis. That kid could end up in the hospital, or worse." Marcus rolled his eyes and turned back to the stove. "Look, lady, I don't have time to make another plate." But Harper didn't back down. There was something in her posture, something unshakable. "I'll wait," she said, firm as steel. And she did. 15 minutes of tension, standing near the kitchen pass like a soldier guarding a gate. And she finally delivered the correct plate. The mother's eyes welled with relief. The little boy giggled as he dug into his fresh chicken nuggets, completely unaware that the quiet server in the second-hand shoes might have just saved his life. But what struck Ethan most wasn't the confrontation or the bravery. It was what happened next. Harper walked back to the kitchen, pulled out a pen, and wrote something quickly on a napkin. She folded it like it was sacred, then tucked it carefully into her apron. That tiny action, so subtle, so intentional, lodged itself in Ethan's mind like a thorn. That wasn't routine behavior. That was record-keeping. Later that night, after the last lights were dimmed and the final keys clicked in the front door, Ethan stayed behind. No one questioned it. He had volunteered for extra cleaning. They didn't know he had a master key, that this place still legally belonged to him. But tonight wasn't about power. It was about truth. As he wandered the empty dining room, shadows cast long over the checkerboard tiles. His thoughts spun back to Harper, her strange rituals, the way she lingered after closing, her acute awareness, the sharp, almost surgical way she engaged with the world, and now, the napkin. Something was unraveling here, and she was at the center of it. In his career, Ethan had learned that those who watched the quietest often saw the most. But what he hadn't realized, what made his pulse skip, was that Harper had been watching him too. And tomorrow, he would find out just how much she had uncovered. The next night began like any other. Ethan clocked in, now fully embodying Rick, the underqualified, overworked dishwasher with aching joints and eyes that missed nothing. But this time, he wasn't just working the sink, he was watching. every breath, every movement. He needed to understand Harper's game. The dinner rush hit like a freight train. 3 servers called out, leaving Harper and 2 exhausted others to manage a full dining room. Ethan observed in awe as Harper moved with balletic urgency, refilling drinks, soothing complaints, catching errors. There was a rhythm to her chaos, a strange kind of grace. Her focus was absolute. By 9:30 the storm quieted. Chairs emptied, laughter faded. Harper started her closing routine, wiping tables already clean, straightening things that didn't need straightening. Ethan stayed late under the guise of deep cleaning the dish pit, biding his time. One by one the others clocked out. Jake, Marcus, even Kyle, who usually lingered to berate someone or flirt with a hostess. Tonight he left early, citing some vague appointment. At 10:15 it was just Ethan and Harper. Only she didn't know he was still there. From behind the kitchen's metal service window, Ethan crouched low, breath held. Harper moved quietly, not cleaning, but searching. First, she approached the espresso machine in the far corner. It was broken, too expensive to fix, too painful to toss. She knelt with practiced grace, reached underneath and retrieved something small, a folded napkin. She read it, then pulled one from her apron, wrote something, and replaced it under the machine. Ethan's heart was pounding. What the hell was she doing? She didn't stop there. Harper repeated the ritual at the hostess stand, behind the bar, in the employee break room. At each location, she retrieved notes, folded napkins, carefully preserved. She'd read, update, and return them like a spy swapping intel. The routine was seamless, deliberate. She wasn't reacting, she was documenting. 10 minutes after she left, Ethan emerged, hands trembling as he crept to the espresso machine. He found the napkin, damp and softened from the machine's heat. Under the emergency lights, he unfolded it. His blood ran cold. In Harper's precise, almost clinical handwriting. Tuesday, November 14. Kyle deleted complaint about hair in food from table 12. Called customer dramatic. No refund. Chef Marcus discarded 3 ribeyes, $89, 0 cents after only 4 mints under lamp. Stephanie lied to table 7 about salmon. Jake served drunk customer 4 more drinks. No manager stepped in. The napkin was filled with damning logs, time-stamped, itemized, shockingly detailed. Ethan's breath hitched. This was more than venting. It was surveillance. From behind the bar, he found notes tracking watered-down liquor, complete with bottle brands and dates. At the hostess stand, lies told to manipulate customers into leaving faster. In the break room, a list that broke him. Unpaid overtime, verbal abuse, employees penalized for dine-and-dashers. Harper hadn't just seen the rot, she had chronicled it. But why napkins? Why hide them instead of taking them home? Then he saw it. One final entry that pierced through everything. New dishwasher Rick asks too many questions, watches everything. Could be corporate or health inspector, monitoring. She knew. She had known. While he thought he was studying her, she had quietly seen through his facade. She knew he wasn't Rick Martinez, the desperate man with a broken past. She had clocked the watchfulness in his eyes, the stiffness of his posture, the careful way he listened. She hadn't just suspected him. She'd written it down. And yet, she said nothing. She let him watch. She kept writing. As Ethan locked the restaurant behind him and stepped into the cool night air, his thoughts spun into a storm. If Harper had exposed his secret, why hadn't she confronted him? Why continue her covert mission knowing he was onto her? Or maybe, she didn't want to expose him. Maybe, just maybe, Harper had been waiting for him to see the truth, for himself. And now that he had, the real question was no longer, what was Harper hiding? It was, what was Ethan going to do about it? Harper wasn't just a diligent server trying to survive a toxic workplace. She was a covert investigator, orchestrating her own quiet rebellion from within the walls of a crumbling empire. Each folded napkin was more than a note. It was a record, a brick in the foundation of something much bigger than Ethan had realized. She wasn't documenting mistakes. She was building a case. And the question that haunted Ethan as he lay awake in the early hours of the morning wasn't one of logistics. It was one of loyalty. What was she planning to do with all this evidence? Who was she protecting? Who was she willing to expose? And, more disturbingly, which side was she really on? For the next 3 days, Ethan moved through the restaurant in a fog of obsession. His every thought orbited Harper's system, the hidden napkins, the cryptic codes, the deliberate precision of it all. He found excuses to work late, lingering after closing to examine each hidden message. The more he read, the more the facade of Carrington's bistro cracked, revealing something foul beneath. This wasn't a random collection of grievances. Harper had created a coded taxonomy of corruption. Symbols dotted each napkin like forensic markers. A tiny W signaled waste. C flagged customer complaints that had been buried. S identified staff mistreatment. But it was the word cage that showed up again and again. Kyle Henderson's name spelled in bold capital letters like a brand on every corner of the crime scene. Kyle wasn't just incompetent. He was orchestrating the restaurant's collapse from the inside out. Harper had caught everything, every deleted review, every fabricated refund. Ethan's hands trembled as he read her notes about how Kyle pocketed cash meant for guests, comped food as a cover for theft, and worse, sabotaged orders intentionally to provoke complaints. Then he'd swoop in, offer free drinks or desserts, and pad the books with fake comp charges. It was psychological warfare disguised as hospitality. One napkin in particular made Ethan's vision blur. Harper had written, "Cage told Maria she owed $47.00 for a walkout at table 15. Maria cried in the break room, said she couldn't afford groceries this week. She's been covering other walkouts too. Check schedule. Maria assigned to high-risk tables 80% more than others." Ethan felt sick. It wasn't just theft. It was manipulation, exploitation, punishment disguised as policy. Another napkin outlined how Kyle was deliberately scheduling employees just below full-time hours to dodge benefit requirements, then pressuring them to work unpaid overtime. Names, dates, dollar amounts. Harper had compiled it all like a case file. But it was the allergy entries that made Ethan physically recoil. Cage instructed Kitchen to ignore allergy requests that delay tickets. Marcus, uncomfortable but compliant. 3 close calls this month. Intervened each time. This could kill someone. Ethan's mind flashed to the little boy. That wasn't just a lucky save. Harper had been intercepting disaster, systematically. As Ethan continued digging through the napkin archive, something shifted inside him. He began to see Harper's system not just as a form of resistance, but as a desperate act of care. She wasn't just documenting violations. She was preparing for battle. Her napkins weren't just evidence, they were lifelines. Among the damning notes, Ethan also found something entirely unexpected. Details so human, so intimate, they broke him open. Harper wasn't just recording wrongdoing, she was writing down people's lives. She knew that Tony, the loud, impatient kitchen supervisor, was working 3 jobs to pay for his daughter's leukemia treatments. She had written down that Marcus, the head chef, was undocumented, and Kyle had been using his expired visa as leverage for silence. And then there were her notes about herself. Used own money to cover Stephanie's walkout tab. Cage knows I won't let others get fired. He's exploiting that. Down to $200.00 in savings. Mom's pension gone after Riverside. Can't let it happen again. Harper wasn't just surviving this place. She was sacrificing for it. She was the only shield some of these people had. The breakthrough came when Ethan discovered what Harper had called the master napkin, taped beneath the manager's desk, encased in a sealed plastic bag. It wasn't one napkin, but several taped together to form a massive chart. At the center, Kyle's name, radiating from it, arrows, dollar figures, initials, events. It was an entire ecosystem of corruption. Harper had calculated everything. Kyle had stolen over $73,000, 0 cents from this location alone in the last 8 months. But what froze Ethan in place was the note at the bottom. Pattern matches Riverside before closure. Kyle transferred here 3 months later. Same strategy, same cover-ups, same destruction. Corporate must see this before it's too late. If Rick is corporate, he needs this. If he's a cover-up, I'm already finished. Mom's pension was tied to Riverside's profit sharing. She lost everything. I won't let it happen here. These people deserve better. The realization hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. Harper had been through this before, and she hadn't just lost a job. She'd lost her mother's security, her future, her trust. And yet, she came back, not to quit, but to fight. Ethan sat in the dark break room, Harper's words echoing in his head like a hymn of quiet rage. She had done more than any manager, any consultant, any corporate executive. She had risked everything to protect people she barely knew. And she had suspected him from the start. Still, she let him stay. Now it was his turn to choose. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Thursday night was quiet. Kyle left early again, citing a family emergency, though Ethan had watched him slink toward the casino down the block. By 9 o'clock, only 2 people remained, Harper and the man she knew as Rick. He watched her through the window of the kitchen, her figure moving through the dining room like clockwork, efficient, focused, weary. At the espresso machine, she reached down, her hand slipping underneath just as before. Ethan dried his hands on a dish towel, untied his apron, and stepped into the dining room. No more hiding, no more lies. Harper. She froze, halfway through retrieving another folded napkin. Her back tensed, her hand stopped moving. Slowly, she turned. The moment was silent. No clatter of dishes, no voices, just the low hum of fluorescent lights and the weight of truth between them. As Ethan took a step forward. It's time you knew who I really am. Slowly, Harper turned. And in that moment, Ethan saw not the wide-eyed shock or defensive suspicion he had expected, but something far more haunting. Resignation. It was as if she had been waiting for this confrontation, bracing for it. Her gaze was steady, her voice quiet but sharp. I figured it was only a matter of time before you approached me, she said, rising slowly, as if each movement cost her something. You're not exactly subtle, Rick, or whatever your real name is. Ethan's throat tightened, the pulse in his ears throbbed like a war drum. How long have you known? He asked. Harper let out a low, bitter laugh. Since day 3. Your hands were too soft. You ask too many questions, too targeted to be casual. You observe people like someone who still believes in fixing things. Nobody watches this place that closely unless they care about it or own it. The things you saw have never been seen by me, by your... Her voice sharpened. So who are you? Really? Corporate spy? Health department legal team looking for liability exposure? I'm Ethan Carrington. The words landed like an earthquake. They echoed between them, reverberating through the air, cracking something unseen. Harper's face went white. She stumbled backward, colliding with a chair. No, she whispered. No, that's not... Her voice broke. That's not possible. I built this company from a food truck, Ethan said quietly, his voice fragile yet grounded. I've watched it rise, and recently, I've watched it rot. I had to know, really know, what was happening inside. So I came here. There was a beat of silence. Then Harper's composure shattered. Her hands trembled violently as tears streamed down her cheeks. She choked out a sob and covered her mouth, but the sound escaped anyway. A quiet, broken gasp. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You don't understand what your company did to my family." "Then tell me," Ethan said, stepping closer, his voice gentle. Harper collapsed into the nearest chair, her frame folding inward. Her body trembled, her voice a whisper wrapped in fury. "My mom, she worked at a textile mill for 37 years. Never made much, but she saved every dime she could. When I got hired at Carrington's Riverside location, I was so proud. It felt like a real future. The manager was kind, the work mattered. I told my mom this was a place we could believe in." She wiped at her eyes, smearing mascara down her cheek. "I convinced her to invest her entire pension, $12,700, in Carrington's stock options. I told her it was safe. I told her I had seen the success from the inside." Her voice cracked again. 2 months later, Kyle Henderson transferred in, and everything changed. Overnight. The waste, the sabotage, the lies, the exact same pattern I've been tracking here. I was too green, too hopeful. I thought it was just a rough patch. She looked up at Ethan, her eyes blazing with grief and fury. "When Riverside closed, the company blamed market conditions. Told us the numbers didn't make sense. The stock tanked. It was worthless overnight. My mother lost everything. 37 years of savings. Gone." Ethan's lips parted. He wanted to speak, but he couldn't form words. "Where is your mother now?" he asked softly, though he already feared the answer. Harper's voice turned icy. "She's in a studio apartment in a low-input senior complex. She skips heart medication to make it last longer. She eats cereal for dinner most nights because meat is too expensive. You know what that does to a person? Watching your mother give up on hope?" Ethan sank into the chair across from her, his legs buckling from the weight of her words. "Pilot of his own, I didn't know," he murmured. "I swear to you, Harper, I didn't know what Kyle was." "But you should have," she snapped, rising suddenly. Her chair clattered to the floor behind her. "You own this place. These are your restaurants, your people. And while you sat in your tower, your employees were getting their wages stolen. Your customers were getting poisoned because allergy warnings were ignored, and no one did anything." Tears still streamed down her face, but her voice had become fire. "I couldn't stop what happened in Riverside. I couldn't save my mom's future. But I'll be damned if I let Kyle Henderson destroy another place, hurt more people, ruin more lives." She pulled a folded napkin from her apron and slammed it onto the table between them. "There's your proof. Every crime, every theft, every lie." Her voice dropped to a quiet, quaking challenge. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Ethan stared down at the napkin. His fingers trembled as he unfolded it. Just one line was scrawled in Harper's tight, urgent script. "Shrink, shrink, shrink. Put forth, protect, I say, undertake. The owner's here, God help us all." 3 days passed like a storm held in a jar. Ethan barely slept. He consulted legal teams, drafted emergency protocols, and initiated internal audits. Everything Harper had written was accurate, and worse, when he reviewed Kyle's employment history, what he found confirmed every nightmare. This wasn't Kyle's first implosion. He had left a trail of destruction through multiple locations. But Kyle was already one step ahead. Friday evening, mid-rush, the front door swung open. A man in a dark jacket walked in, flashing a badge. Health Department, surprise inspection. Harper, balancing 4 steaming plates, froze in place. Her face went pale. Ethan watched from the kitchen, heart thudding. Kyle emerged from the back, wearing his plastic smile. "Inspector, what a surprise. I'm Kyle Henderson, the manager here. I'm sure this is just a mix-up." "Maybe a disgruntled customer?" But Inspector Rodriguez had already crossed into the dining area. He moved with efficiency and purpose. His eyes missed nothing. In the kitchen, he found everything Harper had warned them about. Cross-contamination from shared fryer oil, expired inventory in the cooler, temperature violations, unlabeled allergen containers. Every corner reeked of neglect and danger, and finally, there was no one left to look the other way. The silence was shattered by the inspector's final words, delivered loud enough for every Friday night diner to hear. "This establishment is temporarily closed due to serious health code violations. All patrons must vacate immediately." For a beat, the restaurant stood still, frozen in disbelief. Then chaos erupted like a thunderclap. Customers leapt from their seats, demanding explanations. Cries of "What's going on?" and "We have food on the table" tangled in the air. Panic rippled through the staff. Plates clattered, chairs scraped, voices rose. The walls of Carrington's Bistro, once humming with routine, now vibrated with uncertainty. In the middle of it all, Kyle Henderson's face turned the color of rage. "This is sabotage," he shouted, his voice slicing through the confusion. "Someone called in a fake tip just to shut us down." His eyes scanned the room, searching for a target. And then he found her. There she was, Harper Collins, moving through the chaos with practiced grace, helping customers collect their belongings, speaking to them with calm reassurance. Unflinching. "It was her," Kyle bellowed, pointing a trembling finger. "She's been nothing but trouble since day one. Always meddling, always asking questions, always interfering with my kitchen." Harper turned to face him, leaving a stunned customer mid-sentence. Her expression was unreadable, composed but lit with fire. "I was protecting customers," she said, her voice even. "Someone had to." "You called the health department?" Kyle stormed toward her, venom in his voice. "You're the saboteur here." "No," Harper answered, her voice now resonant and unwavering. "The only one sabotaging this restaurant is you." Her words rang out like a gavel. Around them, the din began to die. Eyes turned. Forks were laid down. Conversations stopped. The entire room, for one breathless moment, stood still. "You're fired," Kyle shouted. "Pack your things, get out, security." "On what grounds?" Harper asked quietly, still calm. "Insubordination? Sabotage? For documenting the truth?" Kyle loomed over her, breathing hard. "You're a cancer in this place." That's when Ethan stepped out from behind the kitchen window. He walked calmly, untying his apron, removing the fake glasses that had hidden his identity. His back straightened, his face lifted, not as Rick Martinez, dishwasher, but as the man who had built the empire now crumbling at Kyle's feet. "Actually," Ethan said, his voice cutting like ice, "Harper Collins is the only person in this building who's been doing her job." The entire room went silent. Kyle turned, confusion twisting his features. "Who the hell are you supposed to be?" Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. He held it high enough for the nearest tables to see. "I'm Ethan Carrington. I own this restaurant. I own this entire chain. And I've been watching you tear it apart for 3 weeks. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Harper's knees buckled slightly. Her hand gripped the back of a chair. Kyle stumbled backward. No, you're the dishwasher. You're Rick Martinez." Ethan calmly pulled out his phone and showed him a photo, the same photo that hung in the corporate office back in New York. I've been documenting everything. Every lie, every theft, every violation you've covered up." Then, in a move that stunned the entire room, he turned to Harper and held up a thick stack of napkins. "But I wasn't the only one." He faced the staff, the customers, the inspector. "Harper Collins has been documenting your corruption for months, quietly, at risk to her own job and safety. She protected children from allergic reactions that could have killed them. She uncovered wage theft, falsified refunds, and negligence. She did what no one else dared." He paused, his voice full of conviction. "Then Kyle Henderson fired her for it." Kyle had already started edging toward the door, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Kyle," Ethan called out coldly, "you're done. Security will escort you out. And when the police arrive to file charges for embezzlement and labor violations, I hope they bring handcuffs. You'll never work in this industry again." As security took Kyle by the arm, Ethan turned to Harper. Her eyes searched his, guarded, stunned. "Harper," he said softly, "we need to talk." 6 weeks later, Carrington's bistro didn't just look different, it felt different. Gone were the cracks in the walls, the broken espresso machine, the air of quiet dread. In their place stood polished tile, bright lights, laughter. And in Harper Collins' new office, above her desk, was a framed napkin. On it was her very first note: "Someone needs to protect the good people here." During the month-long closure, the company had conducted a full investigation. Kyle Henderson now faced federal embezzlement charges. 2 other managers from different locations were arrested as the FBI unraveled a multi-state fraud ring. Harper's napkin records had become the foundation of a massive legal case. But something more important had changed. "These Collins?" Tony, now wearing a pristine chef's coat embroidered with head of kitchen operations, poked his head in. "Staff meeting starts in 5. Harper smiled. "Thanks, Tony. I'll be right there." Her official title, Director of Staff Integrity and Employee Relations, a position created just for her. But it wasn't just a job, it was a mission. The Harper Protocol had been adopted across all 37 Carrington's locations: anonymous staff reporting, integrity audits, safety logs, and whistleblower protections. The napkin system had been digitized into a secure app that empowered employees without fear. In the dining room, staff gathered. These were no longer the frightened faces of Kyle's reign. Arcus beamed as the new executive chef, explaining allergen protocols. Maria, once forced to pay out of pocket for walkouts, now led customer service training. But Harper's eyes found the front row: Ethan Carrington, seated quietly beside her. "How's your mom?" he asked gently. Harper's eyes lit up. "He moved into a beautiful assisted living home last week. The retirement fund you set up." Her voice caught. She cried when she realized she could refill her medications without checking the price. Ethan had quietly created a $2,300,000 0 cents restitution fund for families affected by Kyle's fraud. 17 families had already been compensated. Harper addressed the staff. "Let's start with our weekly integrity report." Hands raised. Stories poured in. Wins, fixes, successes. "I caught a walk-in cooler temperature spike," said James, the prep cook. "Fixed it fast and logged it." "A couple was celebrating their anniversary," Sarah added. "We gave them dessert on the house. Sparkler and all." Harper noted each entry with pride. These moments would have been punished under Kyle. Now they were honored. After the meeting, Ethan lingered in Harper's office, staring at the framed napkin. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "All the hiding, the risk?" Harper considered for a moment. "I regret not speaking up at Riverside. I regret waiting so long. But this," she gestured to the thriving restaurant outside, "this I don't regret." Outside, the lunch rush buzzed with warmth. Staff moved with purpose. Customers laughed. Tony plated a meal for a child with severe allergies, following protocols Harper had created. Protocols now used nationwide. "You know what the best part is?" she asked, pointing to a young server calmly resolving a guest complaint. "She's not hiding napkins anymore. She knows she's safe." Ethan nodded. "The Harper protocol is already being studied by other chains. You didn't just fix this place. You started something bigger." Harper's gaze returned to the napkin on her wall. At the bottom, in her own handwriting, one final line had been added. "Mission accomplished." That night, Harper didn't stay behind to clean or write. There was nothing left to hide. She went home, opened her laptop, and video called her mom, who had just started painting again. Sometimes, the biggest change begins with the smallest act of courage. Sometimes, all it takes is someone brave enough to write the truth on a napkin and refuse to let the silence win. Harper Collins had learned that truth the hard way, and now she was making sure no one else ever had to.